Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around my neighborhood. This is Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, dear listeners. I am out on a stroll in quarantined suburban Chicago today. You can hear the construction site is still working, but most of us are staying in place, sheltering in place, trying not to see too many people. If you've noticed a different tone in my voice, it's because I've switched microphones. Somewhere in the combination of my lapel mic and my old phone, which is 3 generations or 4 generations behind the current level of smartphone, if you go by the little number, the microphone has stopped working properly. I can't even get it to register a signal. I'm frankly surprised I was able to record the last episode, but it worked before. So while I'm figuring out a new situation, I'm using my handheld Zoom microphone, which is definitely a better quality microphone than the one that I usually use to record this, but also has the disadvantage of I have to hold it the whole time, which makes me look a little strange, as though talking to myself doesn't look a little strange. Maybe this makes me look less strange, because I'm clearly talking into a recorder of some sort. But then people are like, why is that guy walking around talking to a recorder? The sound quality must be terrible. Well, that's for you to judge, dear listener. So, I thought today I would talk a little bit about something. My wife and I have been watching the Netflix original Locke Key, which is a dramatic show adaptation of a graphic novel, which I particularly enjoy, by Joe Hill. It's got Lovecraftian themes and weird mystical happenings, and is interesting to read, and the story of the show is pretty good. So I thought about what would a Locke and Key board game be like. That's right, today we have Themestorm, Locke and Key. So if you haven't watched the show or read the comic, the basic premise is there's a family that is moving back to Massachusetts to the ancestral home of the dad of the family, who has recently been murdered. And the children are teenagers. 2 of them are teenagers, something like a high school junior and high school freshman, I think. And then one of them is much younger. In the comic, the younger one is about 6. In the television show, probably just for convenience, the actor who plays him is probably 9 or 10. Which means that in the first couple episodes especially, there's a little bit of disconnect where they keep things from the comic that make sense for a 6-year-old to do and don't make much sense for a 10-year-old to do. But, you know, needs is as needs does. Anyway, when the kids move back, they discover that the family manor that their father had never spoken of is enormous and also full of weird magic. The mom isn't really able to see it, but the children start to discover that there are keys all over the place that do wondrous and magical things. And I'm not going to say what those keys do, because that's part of the fun of the discovery of reading the comic or watching the show. So I'm not going to spoil that part. Suffice to say that there are keys and they do magical things. There is also an enemy who is trying to get the keys. That's about all I'm going to say about that. And I don't think I've spoiled much. So for the Themestorm today, I'm interested in asking, what would a Locke and Key board game look like? How would it play? What kind of mechanisms would suit the kind of gameplay that you have? How does the theme come out in the gameplay? Well, first off, I would say the primary theme of the game, of the show and the comic, and I'm just going to refer to it as a show from now on because that's what I've been reading lately. So the theme of Locke and Key, and I'm going to refer to the show and the comic interchangeably here, is, I would say, a mix of the wonder of magic, the family loss, and dread. Now, those are all distinct things and difficult to figure out how to play out in games. And so I've considered a variety of different ways that you might make a board game out of Locke and Key? Because it seems like the first and most obvious approach would be a role-playing game. Now, the challenge with a role-playing game is how do you make... Because in a role-playing game, you don't just want to play the story out, right? You don't want to have the things that happen in the base story happen in your game. You want to have your own version. So I would think a role-playing game built around Locke and Key would be built around the mythology of it. And instead of playing the family at the heart of the Locke family, at the heart of the narrative we see in the comic, instead you would play another generation of the Locke family. And you would discover things about the house and whatever. There would be different kinds of mystical things. So you wouldn't be playing out the scenarios as they appear in the show or the comic. Instead, you would be playing out different scenarios. Okay, so that's how you do a role-playing game, I think. You'd build one in the world, but not actually retelling the story. In the same way that the recent Aliens role-playing game apparently makes it pretty easy to feel like you're in the world of the Aliens movies, but it doesn't actually have you, play out the particulars of the Alien movie, any Alien movie in particular. Okay. So how would a board game of Locke and Key work rather than a role-playing game? Well, one approach would be the same thing. If you had a game set around a different time period in the Locke house that still uses the same elements but doesn't trade on the same plot, you would have a lot more narrative freedom, at least. But I'm thinking about, people buying the Locke and Key game, they probably want, on some level, to play out the narrative as is. So it seems to me the first approach would be an adventure game in the style of Mansions of Madness 2nd edition. Mansions of Madness already solves a lot of the problems you'd have to have about how to do narrative elements, how to make actions that you take meaningful, how to build suspense in, using an app, or even the older Imperial Assault style or Descent style player-controlled villain, one versus many, would work to have the narrative emerge in an interesting way. And then, of course, you'd have different scenarios for the different sort of plot arcs of the game. You could have some things that take place at the school. Mostly things would take place at the house. You have the characters discovering, each discovery and use of a key could be a different adventure, or even using one key and learning what it does, and then at the end of that adventure, you find the next key, perhaps. So that would be a way for players to interact with the game using a variety of different stories. So it seems like adventure game would be the most obvious. There are a number of challenges to making that work. I think the difficulty of having the difficulty of figuring out which things to randomize maybe would be a challenge, and figuring out how to have there be narrative surprise, assuming that your audience already knows the narrative elements. I mean, this would be a real challenge with regard to that kind of game. The next option would be some sort of hidden movement game. I don't really know how that would work. The villain in the story has very flexible movement rules, so unlike a more particular hidden movement game such as Fury of Dracula or Spectre Ops, I think the challenge of the hidden movement game in Locke and Key would be figuring out how to make the characters work better. Probably more sensible there would be a co-op game in the lines of the kind of adventure game we're seeing with Pandemic or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, with a bit broader narrative in which the characters are moving around trying to solve mysteries by gathering clues, and then the clues would lead to plot developments, and those plot developments would interfere with the actions of the villain. And so the villain certainly has hidden movement, and their hidden movement is perhaps not bound by physical activity, but they are trying to accomplish goals. And so if the humans can interrupt those goals, or the players can interrupt those goals, then perhaps they are able to make progress in the story. So it seems like there's some potential in a hidden movement game set around this theme. I'm not sure it would do very good in building dread in, though. Dread is a really difficult emotion to build in to a game. On the other hand, if part of the hidden movement game were like Fury of Dracula, where they're trying to find the villain, but they also don't want to encounter them at the wrong time, then the terror built into the dread of that game would be significant. To accidentally find the villain at the wrong time would be pretty scary. The one game form that I was thinking about that I really can't understand or imagine or conceive in Locke and Key is a Euro game. Because Locke and Key is so narratively driven, it's really hard for me to see how a game built around, I guess, systems of efficiency. For me, most Euro games are built around systems of efficiency of one way or another. And I don't see how a system of efficiency can be built around the narrative of Locke and Key. Even pushing it toward the wider goal of figuring out what the keys are for. I mean, you could super abstract it into just deploying some level of investigation tokens to gather clue tokens and some sort of efficiency like that. But I can't. That's the place where I find myself stumped. So I'd be curious if you're listening to this and you're thinking about the story and have an idea, how would you imagine putting a Euro game mechanisms into Locke and Key? What kinds of things would you expect to see if the game went that way? So that was my Themestorm on Locke and Key. If you haven't checked it out and you're spending a lot of time at home right now and you have access to Netflix, Locke and Key is well worth a watch, I would say. Although not super kid-friendly, so if you have little ones, maybe watch a couple episodes first and decide. There is some violence and some swearing, although more violence than swearing, if I recall, on classic American style. Really good effects that are better than it feels like Netflix originals deserve to be, although Netflix has shown themselves to be a top-quality producer, I would say. But they also make a lot of B stuff, so I'm saying Locke and Key's probably in the A category there. So, well, it's just about time for me to sign off, but I wanted to share something. My design partner and I, Rob, we're working on this thing. It's a return to a thing we did a long time ago called the March Mayhem Board Game Throwdown. So the idea is that we made a bracket of 32 of the best board games on Board Game Geek. It's not the 32 top games, but it's pretty close to that. And we arranged them in a bracket, and now what we're doing is pitting them against one another to see which game is better. And the decider is voters on Twitter. So the day that this episode comes out is also the first day of the showdown. So we're going to release our first episode today, and the voting will go up for that first episode. I'm not sure. I think the voting will probably be for 2 days. To give you a chance, but we're going to have a new episode come out every day, and the voting goes up every day for those new episodes. So lots of chances to vote on games, and the podcasts are about 5 to 10 minutes a piece, so bite-sized and delightful. And if you have a chance to take a listen, please do, and tell your friends about it. Of course, we don't have a lot of spread with that thing yet, but we would like to. It's called Game Fight Show, and it's the easiest way to find it will be at Twitter, at Gamefight Show. But you can, of course, go to rattleboxgames.com and find links there. And you can also find it at the Spreaker page for Rattlebox Games. Or if you search out Gamefight Show podcast, you'll find a link there. So we'd love to have you listen to that. In fact, right here at the end, I'm going to play our promo episode for that. It's a minute long. So take a listen. Here we go.
Welcome to the Game Fight Podcast. It's brought to you by your friends at Rattlebox Games. I'm your co-host, Rob. Here with me is...
Brendan. Why are we here today, Rob?
It's March in America, and every red-blooded board gamer out there wants to keep their eyes on the brackets.
That's right. We're going mad. One might say, to coin a phrase, we're experiencing a little March madness.
If one wanted to get sued, one might. We're running a tournament between 32 of the hottest games out there. Mm-hmm. Every day, there's voting between one game and another.
Okay.
Actually, right now, at the beginning of the tournament, it's so chock full of goodness that to get done in time, we're running 2 sets of games against each other.
No.
Tune back in here. We'll have some discussion every day about the matchup or matchups that are occurring.
Where would people go to find these votes?
The place to find us is Twitter, and how to find us there is we are at Game Fight Show.
Game Fight Show.
Be there. Voting every day.
I judge that adequate.
All right, thanks for listening. Hopefully you found that amusing and would like to give it a try. I'm going to adjourn here a block before I get home because I'm walking toward all this heavy construction equipment. I'm sure you can already hear it in the background. So I hope that you have had a pleasant day so far, that you are able to get out and take some walks. Maintain your social distancing, of course, but enjoy yourself. And until next time, I thank you for joining me, and I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.